everyone. This is episode 14 of the ANR Design Unholstered podcast. Our guest today is Chris. He's the owner of Wolf Den. It's a new company up and coming in the industry. Chris has a Australian Army background. He shoots sniper competitions. He's worked in the sniper community for a long time. And we have him on, and we're going to talk about long gun, where to get started, what to do, and some of the similarities and differences between the styles of competitions that he shoots, two-man team competitions versus PRS and kind of long gun stuff today. It's going to be a long gun day. So, Chris, thank you so much for being on the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Alex. So I, grew up in South Australia. The Australian accent is something over here that gets commonly misunderstood, but we work through it. We work through it. But yeah, I grew up just hunting and shooting, doing a lot of hunting in the mountains, and gradually got into some long range stuff. Started at a real young age with the little 177 air rifle, and just progressed to the little 22 rimfire. And then I think the first centerfire I had was like an old 303 Lee Enfield, right? Like old school British. And then progressed to the old the trusty handy 308 Winchester. And after I finished high school, went into the military progression at that point, and went over to Afghanistan in 2010. I did that for a little while as a marksman, and then in the remote areas of Uruzgan province, in one of the valleys there, and then came back and restreamed to the sniper community and spent the vast majority of my time for the remainder of my career in defense as a sniper, going through various different courses like my basic snipers course, advanced sniper team leaders, sniper supervisors, visual trackers, combat communications, a suite of promotion courses as well. And then I took a bit of a sabbatical actually for a little while and went contracting for the Australian government back over in Kabul, because I missed the place so much, and did 2 years of contracting for the government over there, and then did a few more courses like close personal protection, some remote area medicine courses, and then came back to the sniper stream again. And then I took a position with Applied Ballistics as the training manager for the last few years. And then I recently split from AB and branched out and started Wolf Den. So we've just been concentrating on the startup of Wolf Den and getting the company out there and in that training space.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's been a wild ride for the last 12 odd years.
That's great. So tell us about Wolf Den, what it is, what you're going to do with it, and what your goals are with your startup.
Yeah, cool. So when I split, I started looking at, well, what is the lack of information, and what information doesn't really exist out there in terms of what long range shooters have available. And a lot of what I centered on was there's a significant disconnect between what information the shooter has available on the ground, and then how to utilize his equipment and how to utilize those advanced techniques to tie those fundamentals together to just generally hit more targets for long range shooting. And so I wanted to provide a quality training experience for long range shooters in terms of not just speaking to the shooter and delivering that information, but delivering it in such a way that it's going to be memorable, it's going to be retainable, and the uptake of that information is specifically what I'm focused on. And what I started looking at was, how do I utilize accelerated learning techniques and understand the way the mind interacts, and the way that you can train shooters to a higher level or a higher degree, so that those skills, they're acquired, they're transferred, and those skills can be repeated correctly without any training scars. And that, that has to be facilitated through a learning cycle that needs to be understood. But by concentrating on teaching shooters in such a way, we're able to make sure that the skills are they're learnt correctly, they're replicated, they're conducted properly over, 1,000 repetitions. None of those training scars are taken on because the repetition was conducted correctly, and then from that leads to the skill being transferred and taken a retention state where that shooter is able to replicate that skill to a high degree, as well as what was conducted in the training itself. And so through that, I started looking at, well, how do I develop training schedules or training courses or clinics, as I call them, basically workshops to help shooters develop in various areas, whether that be from a beginner or an advanced level shooter, and deliver that in such a way that it facilitates the learning objectives and the training outcomes that are just going to absolutely support and hammer down on exactly what that shooter is capable of in the future. So yeah, from that's kind of where we got started. And I've been doing a little bit of work with a few key partners in the industry as well. Like we have an arrangement with Heartland Precision Rifle out of Nebraska. I do a lot of assist instructor work with Heartland up there, and then I'm also working in conjunction with Vortex Optics too. Wolfden's established a partnership with Vortex, and I shoot for Vortex as well. So,
Nice.
We've only been we only launched about 2 months ago or a month ago now, but things are gaining momentum and they're taking off. So yeah.
Great. So right now you have curriculum that you're developing and have developed. Setting up courses. Do you have alliances with ranges that you can use when you're doing your classes? Are you traveling? Kind of what's the infrastructure, so to speak, of Wolf Den? How can people get involved and get in contact with your brand? And how would you suggest they get started? Because like that's a lot of information. Like I'm hearing like you're talking about a lot of the information based stuff. Because like I learned how to shoot long gun from an Army sniper. And he's like, "What's your muzzle velocity?" I don't know. Okay, let's calculate it, right? So
yeah,
just basically like, oh, I had 100-yard zero on my gun. Let's shoot different targets at known distances with your ammo. We know what the box says for muzzle velocity, so we can use that as an interpolative number and shoot 3 targets of using applied ballistics, shooting 3 targets at known distances, what the dial was to have your center round impact, and then having a rough velocity, and then doing our tables from there. And then I was able to, the old school way, like measuring your targets with your reticle and putting all that information into applied ballistics the correct way. And then, the same day I shot out to a mile with 260 Remington, and it was cool. It was really cool. But PRS and like at least the side of the industry that I'm in for precision rifle is so streamlined, and everything is so you skip all the basics, you skip all the theory, and then you just go straight to shooting, and it's pretty interesting to see people. So the information side that I'm really happy to hear about your curriculum is to really embed core values of long gun. Because if I never learned from my buddy and I just went into PRS and I had some civvy dude teaching PRS, which is great, I'm not learning those core fundamentals that will remind me the theory behind long gun that I think sticks in your mind longer than putting stuff into throwing stuff into a calculator, or just kind of winging it, or not understanding wind, and just kind of trial by error, which is a waste of ammo and a waste of time in the long run. So anyway, sorry to diverge from my original questions, but yeah, how do you want people to get involved? How do people get a hold of you? How do people find your curriculum, your course structure, and help you build up your your audience?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking us that, Alex. That's a good point. So, firstly, you can get an overview of what we offer by looking or checking out our website at wolfdenusa.com, and then subsequently also I'd say go ahead and follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram as well, which is also Wolfden USA. So you'll see every now and again I still put blog posts up as well. I think I've recently released a few on sniper competitions and developing a team for sniper competitions, and then also why Wolfden chose to partner with Vortex Optics. I would also say our method towards training is very flexible in the sense that we are able to facilitate coming to a local range. If a range wanted to, host wolf den training, that's something that we absolutely facilitate via a mobile training team. But however, you'll also see in the future, Wolf Den's looking at hosting some events at some ranges where we have existing agreements with to conduct that training and support that training as well. So we're also working on the possibility of utilizing some land to develop our own home location there, and that would be that if that eventuates and materializes, which I believe it will, that will be a superb training location in the future for a lot of shooters out there, which would involve moving between lots of different field firing points and constantly changing the environment to have those shooters constantly reevaluating and reassessing the environment in which they're shooting. No wind calls are going to be the same at that point, and it constantly keeps them reevaluating what they're doing behind their weapon system and behind their equipment. Essentially, the way I liken that is in terms of the training continuum. When you're training people, you take them to one range with one firing line, and they get a general idea or a feel for what the wind is doing and what the conditions are doing, coupled with the use of their ballistic solve or whatever they're utilizing there, whether that be a Kestrel or a FONAP. But once they have a general feel for what those conditions look like and what the wind is doing, there's only a slight variation of that from then on, for the most part, right. Terrain dependent. But if my approach to this is by constantly changing firing points and not sitting on one firing point for more than, maybe 20 rounds and then constantly changing location, you're having to constantly reevaluate and readdress those changes in environment, those changes in wind, and it's forcing the shooter to learn and uptake those skills and polish those skills at a much faster, rapid rate than what would otherwise be possible at one single firing line.
Right.
So, yeah, that's a portion of it as well. But basically, our approach to training is extremely flexible in terms of how people can get involved. We are open to hosting courses, and as I said, you'll see dates come up in the near future, and then also the ability to run courses at other locations across the US via our mobile training team capability.
Awesome. That's really cool, and I'm excited to see how Wolf Den develops as a brand, as a training company. You touched upon different positions. A lot of people listening might not understand how quickly the environment does change and how the environment affects bullets, powder temp. If your rounds are in the shade on your body, or did you leave them on top of your bag in the sun? People listening, probably I shoot precision rifle, but a lot of our fans, followers, listeners have very limited experience behind glass. So one of the things that I always tell people, if you do have the opportunity behind glass, spend as much time behind a spotting scope, watching someone else shoot, watching how wind does affect the bullet. People, a lot of people that haven't even touched into long range don't realize that you can see the trace of the bullet. When we say trace, it's the displacement of the heat from the bullet, basically augmenting the water vapor in the air, and very Matrix looking. While you watch it, you can see that nice little trace arc in on your target, and that's a huge important factor if you're spotting for someone, making wind calls. And making your adjustments there. And I think that's one of the biggest shortcomings in PRS is there's not enough people going to skill building classes that are, literally like the second I get on stage in PRS, I'm behind glass the whole time until I have to shoot. And then after I shoot in each position, because I might be, it's kind of like an honor system, like, oh, what was your hold? And the guy in front of me will be like, well, I was holding 4/10 left edge or something like that, or 4/10 left center. And like, all right, cool. I saw that, but I saw what the gusts were doing and the wind was switching. And people don't understand that just you can, if you have really good core fundamentals of shooting, that's awesome. You could press a trigger on a sniper rifle all day long. But it's the environmental, all the different factors that build in. And I think everyone in the black gun community, the pistol community, like really needs to spend some time behind a precision rifle and learn ballistics. Because I did a course, an SPR. I didn't know it was an SPR course. My buddy, I have a very wealthy friend that does a lot of private courses, and I'm friends with all the ranges that he goes to. So I just show up and shoot the course with him. And I didn't realize it was a special purpose rifle class out to like 600 yards. And I brought a 10.5 5.56.
Yeah, just gotta get it done though.
I was like, fuck it, I'll do it. I'll run it. So, I mean, I was still slapping steel out to 400 with a 10.5, and the two guys that were taking the class under the instructor, they never got their muzzle velocities on their SPRs. They don't know their holds at certain distances. They don't have a dope card printed on the side of their glass as a reminder of, 71 degree ambient, this is what it does. And then what you would interpolate in your head, on the fly and make those adjustments. They don't know, these dudes didn't know how wind affects bullet trajectory, how much, 55 grain bullet does move with a 4 mile per hour wind. And, I'm up there with aim point T2, and I'm getting just as many impacts as them with no magnifier at 400 yards. And they're like, fuck you, Costa. And it's like, but I understand this shit. Like, I might not know what the muzzle velocity is coming out of my 10.5-inch gun, but I know that my bullet's going to be somewhere up here above the target to hit the target. I have to aim somewhere up here, and I know the wind is 4 miles left to right, and I know that it's going to move at least one body width, at least like it's going to move 1 mil. So This is where I'm going to hold my red dot. And it was funny, like my buddy had an ATAC or 1-8 Night Force on a 16-inch carbine with a can, and I probably averaged higher than him on impacts, And it's just that fundamental, I think everyone needs to understand bullets. It's wild. And that's one of the coolest parts of getting into precision rifle for me, was just learning all the different facets of what can change. So you see some storm clouds rolling in the distance and you feel a little breeze pick up. Well, your DA is going to change. It might, it might drop.
Right, it's a little micro atmosphere at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. So like on PRS, every stage, like if it's kind of fucking shitty weather or kind of weird weather, I'm readjusting my tables every course of fire.
Right, which is probably the correct thing to do. There's so much to kind of address there, Alex, in just that little discussion, right? I mean, the first thing I kind of see is in the training piece, when I started looking at designing training in such a way, the biggest thing that I see in especially the long range industry is the tendency for people to fill the knowledge gap with equipment. They'll go away and they'll buy like a very expensive weapon system and it's some really good glass and whatnot. And that's all good. But the reality is, if you lack the fundamentals, you're never going to take that weapon system and be able to utilize it to its fullest ability. The way I kind of describe that to people is it's like, you go out, buy a Ferrari, but you just never take it out of first or second gear because you don't know how to drive it. It's the same thing. And so that training piece becomes extremely important in terms of learning how to best utilize that weapon system. And I see people, I think Bushnell in 2019, when I shot that competition, my partner and I ended up coming second at that one. And we were at the prize table there, and the guys who placed third just behind us, we were talking to them, and they were like, yeah, we don't even own rifles or scopes. Like, I borrowed this rifle, this rifle that I'm using for this comp from a good friend of mine, and the scope is another thing that we borrowed from another friend. And I was like, well, shit, guys, do you just want to take the scopes off the table, like, instead of take our prizes instead? Because I think you kind of need them more. But that's a really good example of the opposite. These are guys that are hurting for equipment. They're hurting for that higher end equipment that would probably make them just that little bit more competitive, give them that slight competitive edge. But they're able to take those tools that they do have available to them and use them to the maximum of that tool's capability. And that's a significant thing. That is, it ties into what you were saying with just the ability to understand your equipment and get back and understand those fundamentals. And once you have that understanding, you're really able to push your system further and make yourself more capable, tying back into that 10-inch barreled, short little carbine you're running there. I mean, once you have a general idea and you have a good understanding of what's going on, you can fudge it. You can absolutely fudge it and still achieve those target hits, understanding that the further the distance or the smaller the target gets, the more difficult that's going to be. But you can absolutely do it. It's just a function of it. And that's probably one of the other things that I used to see early in the piece, teaching people about external ballistics specifically. I'm always asking I call it the so what. What's the so what of this information, and what does that help? What does that allow me to do in terms of helping this shooter hit more targets? And so I'm always trying to draw that parallel for the shooter that I'm working with regarding the so what of that information. Hey, this is how this is going to hit you. This is how this will help you make more target hits. And the reality of that is, through knowledge and through training and skills development, you will make more target hits. So if you understand, like, hey, if the wind's coming from the left at the muzzle at a 8 to 10 mile per hour, there's probably some amount of aerodynamic jump. From the left, I've got to add. From the right, I've got to subtract. Probably it's about a 1/10 mil adjustment there. So if I'm understanding that, the so what of aerodynamic jump, not just why it occurs, but how do I adjust for it and how do I account for it at range? Well, I'm going to be significantly more successful at target engagements. Making successful target hits at range.
Right. Yeah, and I'm just thinking in my head while you're talking, I'm like, this could be a 10-hour podcast. Like even down to like zeroing your firearm. So, and one thing I don't like about the competition circuit of things is everyone's trying to go for those Wildcat, super hot, super laser beam rounds, the 6 mils, the 6 gauge Tigers, the 6XEs. And I have a 6GT barrel, and then COVID kicked off, and I'm like, I'm not paying that much for Copper Creek fucking 6GT right now, and I can't even get I shoot factory ammo. I shoot 6.5 Creedmoor, gold medal match, federal, and out of my Krieger barrel, I have a Krieger barrel and a Schillen barrel. I have 2 builds in 6.5 Creedmoor. One was supposed to be a 6GT build, but I had a Schillen 6.5 Creedmoor cut 2 while I was at it, just in case I had an issue with 6GT. And I won at the finale, my first year competing, religiously competing. I won the finale match, came in third for the year, and I walked away with, you know, 2 guns, a receiver, and a bunch of certificates. Like, I got to do prize table twice, which was cool. So I ended up turning this Terminus Zeus receiver into another 6.5 backup gun if my gun goes down. I shoot Kelvely's Black Bear Tactical. Great action, but I made every mistake in the book. You know, I bought a 260 comp gun, and I was like, this gun's great, but I had a Defiance Deviant Tactical, like one of their older receivers, and it kind of bound a lot, and I had issues with different mags, and I was just like, I'm gonna sell this gun, right? And I didn't, 26-inch barrel. It was fucking great gun, but then I was like, I hadn't even shot a PRS match, and I was like, talk to Kelbley's who build fucking comp guns, and I'm like, I want an 18-inch barrel 6.5 Creedmoor. I'm gonna run this ammo because I'm sponsored by this ammo company, and that ammo company had no experience making fucking precision match ammo that goes past 400 yards. Yeah. So they were using fucking Sierra Match 142 OTM, and they were loaded, their metrics were a 20-inch barrel AR-10, and I shot that stuff, and I couldn't even push that ammo past 800 yards without it dying, and then I was like, oh, I want an 18-inch gun because it'll be able to be easier to move around barricades. I'm in the Northeast. You're not going to shoot that far. And then I shoot a match, and I'm like, oh, we shoot far.
Yeah.
So why did I...
Turns out the range on these targets, it's kind of pretty far.
And I'm like, wait, what the fuck? Like, why did I had the perfect, like, the 260 was a good gun. I had, like, a good competition gun. Why did I go and fuck up the recipe in my head thinking I knew better than people that do this for a living? So I ended up completely redoing my whole life. This was like 3 or 4 years ago. And now, I found the federal gold medal match. My buddy suggested it. He's a sponsored shooter. He's a professional shooter, and he's like, dude, run that. Out of my gun, both guns, this shit, the gold medal match 130 grain burger, the federal stuff, is cooking at like just shy of 3K out of both my guns. And that's fucking hot for 6.5 Creedmoor 130 grain. And I finally found, like, this is the cartridge I want to use when I'm shooting 6.5 Creedmoor. But anyway, back to my original point is, the competition, all these guys are shooting 110s, 115s at 3100, and they're just trying to get zero recoil, cheat wind, flat shooter, which is great. It's great for competition, but to me, it's kind of taking away, like, 6.5 Creedmoor, 6mm, that threshold where, like, I don't want to go into the Gucci Ferrari rounds because it also kind of takes away from the skill of shooting a rifle that does have recoil, that does have some recoil that you have to manage, rather than, I could bag my gun and free recoil, shoot it all day, and it doesn't move.
Yeah.
It takes away from that whole aspect of, like, what is your rifle capable of doing? And what are you trying to do with it?
It's interesting you say that too, because shooting those sniper team competitions, the general match requirement for some of that is one of the shooters has to either utilize a 308 or a 223 or 5.56, and so I think it was 2020 Mammoth. I was shooting with my same Oppo that I shoot with generally, and he's running a 6.5 Creed with the 140 grain Burger target hybrids, whereas I was running a 308 Winchester and 175 OTMs, like Burger 175 OTMs, and there's a significant difference there, as you're talking about felt recoil and being able to, free recoil versus having to capture recoil, and how that potentially correlates across to amount of engagement time, re-engagement time on targets, and just generally what that kind of looks like in a competitive sense. And I saw it. I saw it at the comp, and I was, somewhat a little bit slower with that 308, having to really capture that recoil and manage that weapon system, compared to my partner, who's also a phenomenal shooter too, but just with his ability behind that 6.5 Creed, he was just banging those rounds in all day. So yeah, there's a bit of a difference there. You see that, you certainly see that. I think though, when it comes to the PRS, you've got to kind of get that competitive edge by using those sleeker, low drag, high BC bullets at increased muzzle velocities to get that competitive edge and remain competitive, especially if you're up there, competing against some of the other top shooters in the nation. I think there's a lot to be said about using inferior ballistics, such as a 223 or a 308 or similar as a wind trainer, especially when you're training and preparing for competitions.
Right.
Just being that, you know, one good point actually to that is just shooting a 22 rimfire, right?
Yep.
And at distance and acknowledging, hey, I need to be calling with a wind within sometimes less than a quarter mile of true average downrange,
Right.
for me to actually make that target hit, and that's a significant method to better facilitate training in terms of wind reading, honing wind reading ability.
Right.
So there's a few different tricks and things like that you can utilize there. I think it's all a point to note. And actually, now that I think about it, one thing that I also see on the firing line is you've got guys that they have some pretty good equipment, but they might not necessarily have a handle on exactly what they're doing or why they're doing something in terms of inputs that they're using or information that they're giving their ballistic solver. And you mentioned earlier the muzzle velocity temp table, right?
Right.
Well, something that some people don't understand is when you go ahead and populate a muzzle velocity temp table, and that's on in the background as you update your environmentals and it populates temperature, it's also updating your muzzle velocity. So if your ammunition is stored at a different temperature to what's ambient now, your ballistic solver is in some cases populating a different muzzle velocity to what you're actually going to get, just based on the storage conditions of that ammunition. So
Yep.
that's just another thing to kind of be aware of.
I mean, even getting on stage on PRS, right? Mag in, port arms, ready to go. I don't chamber around. I don't just put the gun down. I mean, if it's close, I'll put the gun down, chamber around, get behind it, and press a shot. But if I'm shooting at distance, I am not even going to close that bolt till I am ready to shoot. Why? Well, I just shot fucking 12 rounds 8 minutes ago. My chamber is hotter than ambient. It's 97 degrees out. My chamber's probably 120 degrees. The longer that bullet sits in that chamber, that powder temp rises, and it will be different than my dope. And people from the black gun community don't get that, right? I mean, no one, and unless you shoot machine guns, and then you can go, I've cooked rounds off because my chamber was so hot that it ignited the powder without a fucking primer strike. So, but that's just like the extreme of like what chamber temperature can change to the cartridge as well. So it's there's so many fucking facets on the grander scheme of thing that people that shoot ARs and pistols don't even think of because they're never going out past the distance. And it was really funny. Jorge and I were talking yesterday because I'm kind of an impatient person. I'm building a new special purpose rifle. I was really inspired by my buddy Rudy over at Ridgeline. I shot his at that SPR class because I was like, give me your fucking gun. I want to shoot that instead. Like,
yeah.
Like I was sick and tired of running this 10 and a half and wasting ammo. Like, give me your gun, right? And runs, of course, a fire with that. And he's running a Harris bipod with a paracord pull. Like, some OG shit. And I'm like, there's a reason why he's still running it on a modern day carbine. Because it fucking works. Oh, let me get my Atlas out and let me it's not fast, and I wanted something that's fast, so I'm building kind of like a Rudy special based off of like what I shot from his. And I bought a Badger Ordnance Condition 154 height. I bought a 30 mil because I was gonna get a Leupold 1-6, and then a buddy of mine was like, I got a Night Force ATACR 1-8 in mils ready to go, used for half of what it lists for. And I was like, yes, that. Forgot it was a 34 mil tube. So like 2 days ago, I had to pay for overnight because I'm an impatient person. I could only find 193 heights now, and I'm like, well,
Yeah.
154 is a little shot, a little low, especially if I want to run nods, and I do shoot under night vision quite a bit. I shoot on my own property with night vision. So I was like, let me go with the 170 high because that's like that nice happy
Right.
median.
The lower 1/3. Yeah.
Yeah, I can run the
No.
170, but it's out of stock everywhere. So I ended up buying a 193. And Jorge throws on this YouTube and he's like, this guy wrote a review on the 193. And the guy's like, I have an 18-inch special purpose rifle build. The longest I'm ever going to shoot is 300 yards with this gun. That's long distance, blah, 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 blah. And I can't get a proper cheek weld if I'm shooting precision rifle at 300 yards with a 193. It's more of a chin weld. I'm like, in my head, I'm like, it's a fucking 223. Why the fuck do you need to go full loaded, proned out? Like, 300-yard shot, dude, is nothing. It's nothing for fucking 223. It's nothing for, like, long range to me is anything over 700. Like, just like an average for me. I'm like, no, 500 yards is, when people shoot PRS for the first time, like, oh, 500-yard stage, that one's different. I'm like, that's fucking, that's like the broadside of a fucking barn, right? It's the wind at 700 plus is when I start to see a lot of environmental wind. Like, everything has a lot more impact on your bullet. So it was really interesting.
Especially for a lot of those, those high BC, high velocity bullets and cartridges, right? You just kind of, anything under that 500, it's, pretty much a chip shot.
Yeah, right? It's a chip shot. Yeah. So I was just like, Jorge's like, well, this guy's complaining about it being too high and not cheek weld. I was like, dude, I'll make a Kydex clip-on cheek riser for myself if I'm going to be shooting precision rifle or like shooting longer shots. I was like, but you know what's nice about a 193? I did a night vision class with Rudy, and we were proned out on a surface that was kind of tipped down, down range, and we're tipped down shooting up a mountain at 600 yards. Like, having a 193 would actually be really fucking nice under night vision at that angle behind your gun, shooting passive through the optic. Absolutely.
Right. Well, you can get your pec underneath that as well. And then the reason I guess we're shopping at the same places, Alex, because I just put an order in for some Condition 1 Badger Ordnance mounts as well earlier today.
Good.
So, just chasing down those parts that I'm looking for. And I think I purchased a 193 34mm tube for a 1 to 10 Vortex Razor Gen 3. So
nice.
I'll slap that on, but with a J arm and a base plate for the Spark Solar as well for a 45-degree mount there. So that'll be a sweet little system. That'll be a good little banger.
Yeah, but it's like almost exactly what I did. I went with an Aimpoint T2 enclosed. I wanted an enclosed emitter because after seeing Rudy's build, I'm like, he was a 5th group sniper. If I can remember, I think he was a 5th group sniper. And fuck, dude, I was just like, I want this. Like, I want a do-it-all gun, 16-inch, non-NFA. Like, I can take anywhere, do anything. Because after I was running, because like we would do like SPR fire and then like a little CQB action in between stages, like dump it into a target.
And it'll still do it.
And then like cant it, bang, 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 and then shoot 400 yards, and then bang, 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 10 yards, and then 50, and then back up. And I'm just like, I mean, back when I first got into guns, I was like, oh, I want a fucking shortest thing ever, custom, everything fucking custom. Now I'm just like, I want a well-built factory gun that I can just make it. I used to like, oh, well, what are you going to do with it and how are you going to do it? And it's always been my mantra is like, well, all guns have a capability. What are you trying to do with it? But I've always wanted, like, what's the best end-all, be-all, do-everything gun? And after I shot his gun, I was like, man, this is fucking not wrong. So same deal, aim point, 1 to 8, and set it up that way. And I ended up getting an Arrow, I think it's the M5 upper receiver.
Yeah, the enhanced.
The enhanced. So
yeah, I'm running the same thing, just with a fore rail, which has a milled in arca along the base.
Oh, that's tight. See,
Yeah, it's pretty tight. It's pretty
so
clutch.
Arca's my favorite. Arca's my favorite, and we'll talk about Arca in a second because that's a really cool crossover from the photography industry. But yeah, so I just like how their fucking rail bolts into a bell housing that's machined into their upper receiver. Because I'm like, man, you can put a bipod on it, you can load the fuck out of it. It's never gonna loosen up. It's not slave to a barrel nut that could lose torque or whatever. That system. I didn't realize that existed. I hadn't really dabbled in aero, but then I saw that it's literally a billet upper receiver that has a bell housing. The barrel nut goes inside of it and is shielded by it, and then your rail screws into the actual upper receiver. That's a great system. That's an ingenious system that you're going to get the least amount of losses from rail to receiver. And then you could have SD'd it if you had a shorter barrel and put a can inside it if you wanted to, but I kind of like the fact that it gives all the extra room for the barrel to cool off as well.
Yeah.
So what a perfect little SPR upper that I'm building. But yeah, paranoid about not having the right thing. But how do you like the 1 to 10 Vortex? Because I have a Razor Gen 3, and I think the eye box is a little tight on it compared
Really,
to some
I
other
love
guns.
it. I mean, there's you have to understand as well that 1 to 10 with the increased magnification, right? It's like that vision is generally a little bit of an increase compared to what you typically put on your, your like that, right? So if you're already using a 1 to 10, you're probably looking at utilizing that 10 times mag to really reach out and touch someone at the extent of what that weapon's capability is, that carbine's capability is. So, that typically comes with the I guess that groundwork of that eye box as well. But for me, I'm kind of looking at it like that 1 in 10, I'm slapping that on a 6.5 Creed
Right.
upper, and I'm using that as a rescun scope. So with
Nice.
the idea that I'm going to 6 Razor Gen 2 onto one of my other carbines in 5.56, that's probably going to be potentially a little bit more suited to the up close and personal or up close and dirty type job that I'm going to have that carbine do. But
Right.
in terms of the the 1 to 10, I really I love that optic because of the low magnification ability it has to be able to run through and do that up close and dirty work if required, but still being able to facilitate longer range engagements on a Reese type gun or something similar. Now, I think there's also no reason you couldn't run it on a carbine. It's just whatever the flavor is of the week for you, whatever you personally or individually prefer.
Yeah.
I've heard some guys that I know from the free gun industry talk about, they prefer a second focal plane scope that will go down to a low magnification of 1 times up to whatever, versus a first focal plane scope for a few reasons regarding how they perceive the clarity and the perception of that reticle at some of the lower end magnification. But for me, like, there's the way I look at things when I build out a weapon system, there's always a tool for the job.
Right.
And I just need to be particular and very specific about getting the right tool for the job, and so when I will go about building a weapon system out, I typically build it from the bullet backwards. I'll start looking at, like, okay, well, what is my, as you kind of alluded to earlier, what is my maximum effective engagement range, and what is the objective here with this weapon system? What do I truly want it to do? And by establishing the end goal of what that weapon system is going to do, you'll be able to build backwards on, well, what bullet would I potentially need to be able to achieve this? What velocity do I need to send that out to drive your cartridge as well? Do I need to be able to shoot this alternate position, or is it just a prone rifle? That's also going to drive your cartridge. It's also going to drive your barrel length in terms of what velocity you need. And then from there, it's just a matter of building backwards with the components of that weapon system. Like, okay, I'm going to use this barrel length and this contour with this system, either a bolt action or a semi-auto. I'm going to use this glass because that's going to do what I need it to do. And then I'm going to, at that point, it's just a matter of, picking the components that are actually going to support the task. Right. So it gets easy at that point, I think. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you're sponsored by Vortex. I used to run a lot of Vortex, and then I got pro-staffed over at Night Force, and I have opinions of both. I do like the A-Tacker. A-Tacker's been my like go-to. I run a 7-35 on both my comp guns. Some people are like, oh, 7-35, that's a lot of power. And it's like, yeah, but I'm never shooting below 7 power ever. I used to run like a 2.5 to 17, and there's some fucking distances that I'm like, man, having a bigger glass lets more light in. I can see better at the end of the day. I just, the cut and clarity of those A-Tackers are fucking awesome. And that's one of those cases where when I switched from US Optics to Night Force, quality of my shooting got better. And I used to shoot H59 reticles. That's a Horus 59 for people listening. If you don't know reticles, you got like H59 is kind of like the gold standard for a long time of a Christmas tree reticle, where you have looks like graph paper with numbers, and as you go up in mag, you can do your holds better. Then there's the Tremor 3, which has your wind dots, which is great if you're a lot of like the SWAT snipers that I know love the Tremors because of the wind dots. And then I switched over to the Mil XT reticle from Night Force, which is like an H59 but a little bit more simple. And I watched my progression kind of go up in shooting from that reticle, just because it wasn't that busy. And under time, under stress, shooting PRS, it's like less is more, but you don't want to go too minimal, because then you can't, actually.
Then you're just hurting, right?
They're hurting.
Yeah.
So I found this like happy medium there with the Mil XT reticle, because it's almost an H59, but it's just not as busy, and it's a little bit easier to see. And then they have the gradients on it are like up and down ticks, so it's so you don't get lost on all the same little hash marks. You kind of, I took that shot and it was 2 down ticks, so that's up here. Okay, so that was 6/10, not 8/10 or whatever. Like under time, whatever. So, I shoot Night Force now, but I like Vortex. I got a ton of Vortex. It was probably stupid of me to put the 1-10 on a belt-fed PKM.
No, not that stupid. I've seen guys do good work with those variable mag. Optics on, mag 58s or M240 Bravos for everyone over here. And then also saws as well. Man, it does great work.
It does. Just don't shoot at higher mag. The higher mag would, for PKM would be good. Just to like kind of scope out what you're shooting at, dial it back, and then, do your machine gun course of fire. But I did put a 1-10 on a fucking PKM, which is rad. It's still on there. I'm switching over to an EOTech because I was like, man, the PKMs. I have a suppressed PKM, so it's just
that's badass.
Kind of fucking ridiculous though. Yeah. And the rate of fire's through the roof, and it was a bad build that I bought from Larry Vickers, and the gun beat itself to death, and I had to send it out for repair, and they had to fix everything because the gun really actually beat itself to death. But yeah, I was running a 1-10 on it. It was just kind of funny. And, so we got glass, at least for fundamentals. So we can talk, I definitely want to get into like the team aspect of what you shoot, for perspective for people listening. In Precision Rifle Series, which is a solo act, you have spotters that call impacts, but they don't call, like, if you miss, you miss. They don't call it an impact. If you get an impact, they call impact. If you get an impact, they don't tell you where you impacted. So that's kind of on you to figure out. They don't call wind for you. So the whole part about PRS, it's usually like 6 to 10 shots or 6 to 12 shots per course of fire. There might be a mandatory mag reload, different shooting positions. You might move through different positions. but you have to make your own calls. You have to realize your own mistakes. So what I've learned from PRS is come up with a ritual right before you're ready to shoot. You know, mag in, scope covers open, like go through your ritual every fucking time. And then when he calls gun or up or engage, I get into position. I bolt stays open. I get into position and I take my fucking time building my position. Not too much time, but if you rush to build your position, what's going to happen is your fucking gun slides off your bag halfway through the course of fire and you try to fight through it and you're just going to fucking make your life worse. So building position is number one for me. The biggest thing that I had to overcome was building position. Number two for me was follow through. When you press that shot, just don't run the bolt real fast as you can because you think you're saving time. It's all about follow through for me. So press that shot. If I can see trace, that's great. A lot of times you can't, but try to see that impact. And sometimes you're shooting at a target that has vegetation behind it. You can't see your miss. So that's number two is follow through. Just exhale after the shot. Don't run the bolt. Just try to see where you missed. Third would be trust your fucking wind tables. If you know you have a good wind read and you know it's true, and you picked your angle correctly and you know that that's right, fucking trust your wind tables on your ballistic solver, because if you don't, a lot of times I get in my head going, oh, well, there's gusts or it's dying down or this or another. And then I'll go a little light on my hold rather than staying true to my table. And then I fucking miss exactly where I should have missed because I didn't trust my tables. So trust your tables. Couple things that I have noticed that aren't as imperative in PRS is I do naturally do my breathing right and trigger press. But if you have a really well built position and you do your follow through, even a bad trigger press on a hair trigger isn't a bad trigger press. I have noticed, we're not talking about stacking bullets at 1,000 yards. We're talking about hitting a plate. So you got to find that balance between accuracy and speed. So those are
Right.
my perspective from PRS.
I think too, Alex, at that point, it's just a matter of making those target hits as well, and there's some forgiveness there as well, right? Like if you're coming up against the clock, something always has to give. Like you could take the most amount of time possible to build the best position possible, and you'd probably be able to group sub MOA all day, right? But at the end of the day, like if you're on the clock for that stage, which you always are at PRS, there's some give and take in terms of how quickly you drop into that position and put rounds on target. And I absolutely agree with you, about taking a little bit of time to really build that position up and make it, build it to a point where it's going to do what you need it to do. Because the thing that I typically see is everyone's so fixated on getting their rounds off and putting those bullets down range that they will sometimes neglect that good position, building that good position in the first little bit before they put that first round down. So they put that first round down, they miss that first round, then they might miss a second round or whatever, then they might come back and rebuild that position at that point because they've realized, hey, I'm not hitting anything by doing this, as opposed to just take the time to really set yourself up first up and then put down well executed, well placed shots. At that point, you'll save yourself a little bit of time just from the sheer fact that you don't have to, you rarely have to go ahead and do a rapid re-engagement.
Right.
So, you save a bit of time there. But yeah, I agree. I mean, they're all good deductions, to be honest. I think there's a lot of merit in the points you just covered there, mate.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's one of those things is you rush your position build and then you're fighting your weapon system the whole time to keep it ballast or whatever, and you end up wasting more time in the long run, and then you don't get to focus on wind, right? So if you build your position and you miss your first shot and you're stable as fuck, then you can put all your mental capacity into trying to figure out what's wrong with your wind table or what happened between when the bullet left your gun and missed that target. And because wind is probably the biggest effective bullshit, and it's going to augment your trajectory the most out of everything if your position's built up, your trigger press was executed well. So
Right, that's it. Like if you're gonna miss, you're gonna miss because of wind, or that's the way it probably
you
should
want
go,
it to
you know?
you
Yeah,
want to miss because of wind, not because
yeah,
you did something negligent along the way. And
yeah,
and that's one of those things for new shooters. I like to try to teach new shooters. Anytime there's someone's like, "Oh, it's my first time shooting a match," I'm like, "Hey, do you want to be coached today?" And they're like, "No, it's okay." Then a round in, they're like, "Can you coach me?" I was like, "Yeah, you're yielding all your points for the day, but you're not going to waste ammo. You're going to get more impacts. You're going to be confident about yourself leaving here that you learned something, and you'll probably come back. If you
yeah,
don't do
yeah,
any of that, you might not ever come back. And I want people to come to the sport and enjoy it. So you shoot 2-man comps, and that has a lot more. There's probably a lot of workup leading up to
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Talk
yeah,
about 2-man comps and your perspective in the most important parts of 2-man competitive shooting.
yeah. I can do that for sure, and I'd love to. So, I've shot a few two-man sniper comps in the military back in Australia as well. However, the comps that I'm shooting now, like Mammoth, Bushnell, I know Vortex is looking at running some sniper comps in the future as well, and they're typically 3-day team events that requires you to ruck from stage to stage, cover your distance in a set period of time. If you don't make your distance with your equipment on, that's an automatic DQ. There's no second chances or anything on that. You've basically got to be hitting those times for all 3 days. Otherwise, that's the end of your competition there, regardless of how well you were doing on the shooting stage. Now, um, the build up for those sniper typically begins, many months in advance to a competition. Some guys I know will start training for Mammoth up to a year out, depending on how fit they are. I typically don't. I mean, I've always been relatively fit and maintained a good level of fitness. So I would typically start training for Mammoth about, maybe in terms of fitness and rucking, just to make sure that I'm getting that time on my feet. I'm getting that time with my ruck on my shoulders, and I'm packing my equipment. I'm checking. I'm doing all of those equipment checks and making sure that everything has a place, and everything is not only in good working condition, but it's going to do exactly what I need it to do on the day as well. Concurrently, I would suggest for the new competitor, don't start rucking at 2 months before the comp. That's not a good idea. Maybe start at least 4 to 6 months before the competition, just so you have good time on shoulders as well.
Right.
That's probably one of the key things that I see on those competitions that weeds teams out. I think on the 2020 Mammoth Sniper Comp, where Zach and I placed second, probably there was about, I want to say, somewhere around 40 or 50% of the teams remaining that had started on the first day. So we're talking about pretty much a 50% attrition rate over the previous 2 days,
Wow.
by teams not making ruck times or injuries, things like. My point in this with the team events, there's a significant amount of preparation time that goes into it beyond just ammunition, weapon system, a bit of shooting practice as well. Now we're also talking about how do we effectively engage targets and conduct a stage as an effective and cohesive team as well. And that there is absolutely the core principle behind being successful on these team sniper comps. I wholeheartedly believe that a good team that can communicate effectively, can leverage off of the team strengths and the individual strengths and mitigate the team weaknesses and the individual weaknesses, will perform a lot better than two individual shooters that are exceptional shooters that have come together to form a team but can't communicate or can't work as a team at all. You see that, you do see that on those competitions where you have excellent shooters there without a doubt, but the team itself can't communicate on a good level, and as a result, they can't execute a stage as effectively as what other teams can that maybe aren't quite as good shooters.
Right.
And so when it comes to team cohesion and teamwork, that's going to be the thing that makes or breaks your team. If you're exceptionally good team, you work exceptionally well, and I kind of say to people sometimes it's not a bad thing to have different walks of life as well, where they're one guy, for instance, like I come from the sniper stream in the military community with multiple deployments under my belt, but my partner Zach, he's a mechanical engineer. He currently still works for Applied Ballistics. He's in the National Guard at the moment, but we come from two very different walks of life, but that absolutely supplements and bolsters up our ability to effectively engage targets as a team, because we're both able to offer something completely different to the team when we're trying to determine, hey, how should we attack this stage? It's like brainstorming occurring on the spot, and we're just going back and forth as to how would be the best way to approach a stage. We collectively center in on how we're going to execute and attack that stage, and finally tune and polish the execution of that, go through our pre-stage checks, including rehearsal and run through and visualization, and really that mental preparation that goes with competition shooting. And then once we've done that, in the past we've performed exceptionally well. The Bushnell Sniper Comp in 2019, when we placed second, that was our very, very first sniper competition working together as a team. It was Zach's second sniper competition in his shooting career. And, as I said, I've shot a few sniper comps, but the military ones are very different compared to the team events that we see over here that are very shooting eccentric compared to stalks and observation lanes and judging distance and aerial platform shooting and things like that you might see over a 2-week military course or 2-week military sniper competition. They're kind of two very different beasts there. Right. But ultimately there's so much that has to occur at each stage, and the stages, they're not typically given to you ahead of time. So you'll arrive, you've just rucked, you're going to cover 10 miles a day at least, plus whatever you do on your stage as well. You're going to be carrying all of your equipment and all of your ammunition, and you're probably going to be a little bit tired towards the end and hungry and maybe cold and miserable or whatever. But it's also about looking past that and collectively as a team embracing the suck and just having at it, And I think the teams that do really well, they're the ones that can put that aside and continue to work effectively as a team and functionally as a team, and they typically do well. Yeah. But just with the nature of those the nature of those stages, and that you're talking about pistol engagements, you're talking about multiple moving parts. Maybe you're dragging a dummy or a casualty between different firing points. Now you're also talking about alternate positions and different engagement sequences that have to occur from primary to secondary shooter, back to primary and secondary across two different weapon systems, because you shoot pistol on those comps as well. It's a very dynamic and very quick, fast-paced type of competition, but it's a good test. It's a really great test of your team's abilities and your ability to think on the fly, to communicate, to engage and execute effectively.
Yeah. So you talked on a lot of different points, and I forgot about the pistol aspect of it because we sponsored a couple teams, and I remember, we need our pistol holsters too. So things that I've noticed over the years, snipers are terrible at shooting pistol. Not shooting pistol, but their body positioning. They don't shoot. They shoot pistol raked out behind the gun, fully squatted, lean over.
The old school way.
The old school way. So, and everything you just talked about, for anyone listening, you guys think you're good on a flat range. Fucking get behind a long gun, understand ballistics. You still got to shoot a pistol element, and some of you guys listening might be like, "Oh, I'm fucking great at pistol. I could do this." It's like, if you guys want the ultimate LARPing, and you wanna put all your Instagram bullshit and drama behind you, train for a fucking event like this. This is, I mean, for anyone that thinks that they can compete with former military dudes and think in their mind that just because they're a really good shooter, they can stack up against military dudes that have done it professionally. This is an opportunity for you to do an actual workup, train for something, get physically fit for something, and communication is huge. And one thing I did notice about working with a lot of the military dudes on the sniper side for other projects is the two-man team communication dynamic. I like what you talked about, Zach being a mechanical engineer. He brings probably a very technical aspect. He probably has an eye for certain things that you might not.
Yeah.
But you being from a sniper background, the communication between shooter, spotter, shooter is huge. And I was taught from my buddy Justin Petito, who was an Army sniper, and he walked me through the very basics of sniper spotter communication. But could you touch really quick on sniper spotter communication for something like Mammoth? Like when you finally build your position, you guys are, I mean, you might be laying on top of each other at some point, stacked on top of each other because of the position you got to be in versus the position he wants to spot, right? And then and for people listening, you want the spotting glass as close over and low to the shooter as possible, so you can make the most accurate suggestion, correction for a missed shot or evaluating the shot. So if you can just talk about quickly positioning between you and your partner and communication that happens from the built position, ready to press that shot, through the shot, and maybe a follow-up shot.
Yeah, absolutely. That's easy to do, Alex, and I'd be happy to. So I think the first thing, and you've touched on it already, is the positioning of the spotter. And it's kind of interesting. So the way I typically would run my team and the way Zach and I run now, when we first started looking at competing in Bushnell, and Zach actually asked me, like, "Hey, Chris, do you want to compete in this competition?" And at that point, I'd only just recently gotten out of the military, and I wasn't really sure whether I wanted to, go back to throwing packs on or rucks on and going back to doing it again. But I said yes, with the proviso that, hey, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it properly, and we're going to run the team, the most effectively, and we're going to try and make something of it. And it absolutely worked. So the way that Zach and I will typically conduct business is the shooter will always position himself in the best possible position, right? Because he's the one that ultimately has to engage the target. And even if the spotter can't spot in some scenarios, like if it was an urban environment or something, sometimes you're just going to have to understand and accept that, hey, as a spotter, I'm useless right now. Eyes on my target. In most scenarios, you are going to be able to get eyes on your target, but it's that coming back about, if you can't get on the glass because the aperture or the engagement window that you're shooting through is so small, or the scenario doesn't support that, what else can I be doing? Can I be preparing equipment elsewhere? Can I be, potentially ranging other targets? Can I be, what can I be doing to help facilitate and support my teammate hitting more targets? And so that kind of ties back to that piece. But I will always, being the secondary for these team events, and Zach always being the primary shooting 6.5 Creed, I'll always position myself back behind his right shoulder, as low to his right shoulder as I possibly can, so I'm getting a good bead on the trace and exactly where that's going down range. I think one common thing that I see is, which is a mistake, is to think that you're effective as a spotter when you're positioned slightly offset and away from the shooter himself.
Right.
In which case, now you're viewing the trace. Like, you're still going to pick up that trace, but you're viewing the trace from a slightly different angle to what the shooter's line of sight and trajectory is, and your calls aren't going to be any correction in terms of elevation or windage, especially that lateral component, it's not going to be very accurate in terms of your ability to make that correction and center that second round re-engagement on the target. So that's the first thing I typically see. Like, there's a few different ways you can achieve that positioning behind the shooter, but in the prone, I'll always try and get prone just off of his right shoulder. In the sitting or the kneeling, I'll try and get just elevated above his right shoulder.
Right.
That's going to facilitate my ability to make better corrections as well.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to just the communication and the patter itself, I looked at, well, what was the SOP and TTP for sniper teams back in Australia, and how do I modify that to make it even more functional and effective and quick, understanding that these are quick-paced, rapid engagements where you're on the clock and majority of teams won't engage all targets and they won't use the entire round count for the 3 days either. So to me, it seems like, okay, I need to design, or we as a team need to design a way to communicate effectively with the most minimal amount of verbal communication possible, but in such a way that it's still going to communicate the information without being misunderstood.
Right.
And so anyone who's worked with Zach and I or spent some time next to us when I've been behind a spotting scope or vice versa, because we both operate and call exactly the same way now as a function of just that team cohesion. So there's no confusion or there's no misunderstanding there. But I will typically cut all of the precursor to an engagement with that team patter. And I expect Zach to get into position behind the weapon system and give me a ready when he's on target and he's ready. Now, in between this, we might still already be talking. We might have, well, we've certainly already established roughly what we think the wind is doing and our engagement scenario, like the sequence in which we're going to engage those targets. But we're constantly reaffirming that. We're constantly reconfirming and observing what the wind is doing up until the point that we send that round. And as the spotter, that's one of the jobs that I'm primarily doing while he's getting on target and getting himself into a position that he can facilitate a well-placed shot. So at the point at which he's saying ready, I'm saying send it, because I should already be on the glass. If he doesn't hear anything back, he knows, hey, I'm not on the glass yet, and he's not going to send it until he hears that verbal cue from me. Because the worst thing he can do is send that first round. We miss that first round collectively, and now we don't have any feedback from which to adjust off of. Right. So now we may as well be back to that first round engagement again, as opposed to a second round correction if we miss.
Right.
Then, there's a few other key words that I will utilize, but basically when I, as a team spotter, am communicating, I'm driving the team and I'm driving the shooter. I'm telling him where I want him to go and what targets I want him to engage. I'm giving him the dope if he doesn't already know it. And I'm giving him an updated wind correction. I'm giving him feedback on the point of impact on the target as well, whether it's a hit and a miss. And I'm doing all of that in just a few key words. I'm using keywords like hit, miss, hold left edge, hold head, or hold right hip, or give me 0.5 mil hold left. Or vice versa. I'm asking him, maybe I'm also asking him what he's got for spin, but probably not, because I'm driving that. I should know what he's got for spin because I have his gun profile synced across to my Kestrel,
right.
Or I have his DA card slipped into my wrist coach. So I'm driving his dope, and then I'm telling him the next key word that I'll utilize is bounce. Some guys will use switch, but I use bounce to get him to communicate basically like, hey, at this point in time, we're changing targets now. Bounce next target, 500 meters. IPSC, or whatever it is, right?
Right.
And then I'm giving him the dope. And so there's very minimal, I would say, I would call it very minimal useless communication in there. It's very effective, very concise, very direct. There's no real questionability remaining within the words that we're using to communicate there. Now, the other thing I would say is it's not specifically that I drive the team or I drive the primary shooter to engage those targets. That's generally the way that plays out.
Right.
However, there have been scenarios where Zach has a bead on a target that I haven't been able to identify, and he starts driving me as the spotter. He starts directing me and telling me, and then I'm just feeding him dope and feeding him those updated wind corrections. And that's a testament to the flexibility of a team if they're able to acknowledge that, like, hey, in this moment, without us discussing it and communicating, I acknowledge that we're better suited by you driving the team right now as the shooter. And I'll take a step back as the spotter, and I'll still facilitate those target hits, but I'm going to do what I can to help you hit those targets now. And then at that point that it becomes less advantageous or less conducive, I'm going to take that step forward. He's going to take that step back, and I'm going to take the team over again.
Right.
But there's no discussion there. It's very fluid.
Yeah. So it's like you call a 5/10 hold left, but maybe it was a shooter error, not a wind error. And it's like, nope, want to shoot that again, or like that was my fault that I missed. Like, all right, so you have that dynamic. I think that's really cool. You've observed PRS, but you haven't shot PRS. Is there the efficacy of communication and the shooter? How much follow? Like, so I talked about PRS follow through, watching my trace, trying to watch my trace, watching my miss. I'm assuming Zach does that as well. While you have like two heads better than one, rather than him just running the bolt fast and waiting for a call. So he's still doing his follow through, just in case maybe you make a bad call. He can backpedal and, like you said, drive the team. So he could make no, I like almost like not a disagreement, but a slight adjustment to your call. So he's still doing follow through. He's still not running the bolt lightning fast. I'm sure there's teams out there that they solely rely on the spotter, so the shooter's just fucking running it fast. Whereas, maybe not pulling as much data as two heads are.
It really depends too on what the engagement scenario is driving you to do, right? So, for instance, some engagement scenarios, Zach and I would be better suited engaging our individual targets separately, where we're not even behind the glass spotting for the other person,
right?
Because the target ranges are close enough that we should be able to spot ourselves,
right?
And so we're maximizing our time on target by doing that. Whereas when we start to get further out, especially at those extended engagement ranges there, where you're talking 800, 900, 1,000 meters, or in some cases it's been out to 12 or 1,400 meters on some of those competitions. Now you really do need to start potentially using a spotter at that point, and that also drives, hey, what equipment are we taking as well? Do we use a second weapon system, the scope on that second weapon, or do we bring a spotting scope as well?
Right.
And that's ultimately going to be driven by the type of competition that you're entering. And quite frankly, some competitions are better, facilitated or better tackled without a spotting scope, but then others, you get there and that's kind of the fun of it as well, the fun of the task. What equipment do I bring, and how much ammunition do I bring to facilitate doing the best that we possibly can? And in some cases you get there and you're like, damn, I really wish we had a spotter for that stage. But in other cases you're like, no, the rifle scope on our secondary system absolutely does everything we need it to from a spotting standpoint. So there's a few things there for sure. It's just I can't stress the need to be like very dynamically flexible and fluid with each stage, because each stage you arrive at, might not be any different, so might not be even remotely close to any of the other stages you shoot for the rest of the competition.
Right.
And so you're just kind of there in the moment, figuring out how do we attack this stage, in what we perceive to be the most effective and most functional method possible.
Yeah.
So,
do they tell you a round count for Mammoth or Bushnell? Like, you're going to shoot 93 rounds on day 2? Or...
They'll give you a stage brief when you attend each stage, and they'll give you a competition round count as well.
Okay, but prior to for work, okay, cool.
But the competition round count there will look something along the lines of, if you were to engage all targets across with first round hits, you would need 180 rounds to achieve that, or something like that. So now you start taking into account, well, am I going to run any follow-up shots? I'm probably not going to hit all of my targets with the first round for all 3 days, which is very likely.
Right.
And now you're starting to really analyze, well, not only how many rounds do I bring to the competition total, but how many rounds do I keep in my pack for the day? Or if you're, rucking in the tough man division where you're out there for all 3 days.
Dude, ounces are pounds for real.
Yeah, all of the ammunition that I could possibly need for the next 3 days. Also understanding, hey, I need to carry that ammo too. So, and that ties into, what cartridge and caliber you're using. Like, if I'm shooting a 308 Winchester, but I'm shooting 200 grain, 20Xs or something like that, that's a significant amount of weight to even 200 or 220 rounds.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone hasn't rucked, and then it comes out of gear requirement, like you said, are we bringing a second weapon system, or are we bringing a spotting glass? That all adds the fuck up, plus water, plus snacks, plus food, whatever. You have to bring that all with you. And a lot of the competitions I shoot, even though they're not over distance, you still have to bring your gear, hike it up the mountain, get to the shooting stages, hike it in between shooting stages. And that's really been a huge testament to what I carry for gear now too. Because back when I started shooting these, the size of a dry, maybe like the shooting position of one of the areas that I shoot, it's probably 50 feet or 80 feet long. And they have 8 stages on 50 feet or something like that, right? Like all smacked together. So I know that I can bring more gear because I'm not going to be lugging it between stages. But I've really learned, I have every bag known to man. I'm sponsored by Coltac. They make awesome gear, bags, cuddle bags, all kinds of stuff. Dustin hates me because I run a pint-sized Game Changer from Armageddon Gear. That's sand fill wax bag. I mean, That's my favorite fucking bag ever. Are there shortcomings to it? Yes, I've shot a couple stages where it wasn't enough bag to get up to where I needed it to. But that bag pretty much does fucking everything under the sun. It's sand fill. Sand fill's great if you're not lugging it around. Get Light. People don't understand gear. So Get Light is a fill that people use that weighs nothing, that condenses like sand. Super cool. I still think you can't beat sand at the end of the day. Sand in a wax bag, you can't beat it. Slam my Arca rail down on it, and that thing just sits. So for gear, I used to have like 8 bags hanging off my ruck, and let me put this rail mounted bag on, or this, that, and another. And now I run pint-sized Game Changer and a cuddle bag. And if those 2 bags I can't solve a situation with those bags, then I'll use my fucking backpack, like my whole ruck. I'll use my ruck because that can be used in certain aspects of the competition or certain stages. But that's been my biggest thing. Is I used to have every bag under the sun. Oh, this bag might be a little bit better for this, and try this, that, or another, and I end up just blowing my back out carrying all that shit around. And the one that killed me was I shot PRS New England up at Ridgeline Team O'Neill up in Dalton near me up here, and it's fucking insane. once you're on the mountain, you're on goat trails, on 80-degree inclines, just winding up and down all fucking day in the heat. And that was one of those times where I'm just like, why the fuck do I have 5 bags? I need a cuddle bag and a fucking pint-sized wax game changer sand fill. That's all I fucking need. I do my exact round count for the day, and the rest is water. Water and a couple snacks, and that's it. Like, do I have a rangefinder? Sure. Do I ever fucking use it? No, because we don't need to use rangefinders on most of these Course of Fire because they give you the corrected. Which is another thing. I don't know if Mammoth and Bushnell, you have to make your corrections or not. People listening, corrections would be, if you're shooting level, that's fine. But when you start changing elevations, shooting down, shooting up, your dope's going to change based off your corrected. So a lot of these places will give you a corrected range. So then you are shooting essentially line of sight. If you're shooting down, you still have to make your adjustments for elevation a little bit, but it's not much once you have the corrected. And then that shit it's just 2 bags now. It's like 2 bags, a sling, and I do bring a tripod and a spotting glass because that's going to be the biggest game changer for me as a PRS shooter, is watching everything that goes on. But I mean, tripod's not even necessary. I saw the new last year or 2 years ago, I saw the new Nikon binos that have a stabilization button in it. And you're just like, this dude's standing there just like stable. And he's like, try this. And I'm like, oh my God, why the fuck do I have a tripod that I'm lugging around all fucking day? Do I need a tripod? A lot of PRS stages, there'll be a tripod that is already set up and you can't use your own tripod. Tripods are great for, an improvised improvised position where you grab the tube of the tripod and rest your rifle stock on it and you get your extra point of contact. Or I've used my tripod for, we're shooting off a car door and we were allowed to stabilize the weapon system anyway, so I lowered my tripod, put a bag on top, and just rested my gun, 2 bags, one on the door, one on that, and it was perfectly stable, didn't have to move shit and clear the Course of Fire. So tripods are super good, but those are 6-man squads, so one person bring a tripod for everyone and take turns carrying it. Or, what are you going to use and how are you going to use it? But gear gear is, I think, the biggest trial and tribulation for people in these sports is, what the fuck do I need and what can I improvise along the way to save face in the long run in terms of energy, exertion. And I mean, dude, when you're smoked at the end of a fucking day and you're trying to shoot a really technical Course of Fire, people listening, these rifles are fucking 25 pounds. And, you're lifting that gun up and down, moving in between cover and getting to your position and bringing your bags with you. And after rucking all fucking day, you're smoked and you start making all those tired mistakes as well. So it's fucking cool, man. The most gratifying I have ever felt in the shooting community is shooting long gun. It absolutely is, because it takes all your black gun, AR, pistol fundamentals and puts them into everything that will fuck you up in terms of environmentals, wind, and it'll test your fundamentals to your absolute core, and as well as your physical. And I've never had more fun in my entire life doing anything competitive other than shooting long guns. So it's a good podcast. We're at 1 hour and 40 minutes recorded. So
yeah.
So I mean,
just been chewing it. Yeah.
We can fucking do this all day long. I think realistically here, this is a lot of information. A lot of people that are listening will have to listen to this twice to process it all, because
every now and again.
You talked about BC, ballistic coefficient. What's important about ballistic coefficient? Well, 1 is the perfect number. BC's going up to 1. The higher the BC, the higher the number of BC is closer to 1. Technically, the ballistics are better for a projectile, correct? Would that be the easiest way to say it?
The higher the BC, the better. But I think the other thing that a lot of people aren't talking about is ballistic, which is what is the drag consistency of each bullet to bullet. Can you say that again? Because
you cut out right when you said ballistic, and then it cut out.
Okay. Yeah. Ballistic coefficient standard deviation.
Yes.
So what is the drag consistency bullet to bullet as well, which ties into manufacturing processes? So if your bullet is really sleek and high BC and, it's low drag, that's great. But if your, bullet shot to shot is manufactured in such a way that there's a variable amount of drag on the bullet, that's going to cause a lot of variability or vertical dispersion, as we call it. And if you can shoot the highest BC bullets, but if they're not consistent, you're still not going to hit anything,
Right.
because shot to shot, you're going to have an increased vertical. That's just something to be aware of as well.
Yeah. So for people listening, I'm a mechanical engineer. I love drag models. I did a lot of wind tunnel testing in college, but so we're talking about drag for people that understand how drag works. It's in bullets, it's skin friction drag, so that if you can picture this, you hold your arm out and you drag your fingers across your arm, right? Pretend your hand is the wind and the surface of your skin is the exterior of the bullet, right? Even down to the finish of the bullet can change the drag on the bullet. The geometry of the tail, so you'll hear people say like boat tail hollow point or boat tail OTM, that's open tip match. Even down to the bullets. Bullets that are OTMs, it's essentially, what is it, like 5% of the bullet or 8% of the bullet tip is actually hollow, and the tip of it is essentially missing. It's not a full metal jacket, and it has a similar effect to like a pickup truck, where you have that wind buffer. Like if you have your tailgate up on a pickup truck, it creates a bubble in the back and it lowers your drag of your truck. If you drop your tailgate while you're driving your truck, that creates a drag coefficient because the wind is not creating a pocket effect back there. It's pushing down on your tailgate and your gas mileage is increased and it's putting more load on the vehicle. So the tip of an OTM bullet is similar. It creates a little air cushion right at the tip of the bullet while it's flying, and it reduces the skin friction drag over the bullet as it's passing through the air. And then obviously things that increase drag are humidity and environmental effects and all that other shit. So like you can get down to a molecular level of why bullets do what they fucking do. But I hope that did I explain most of that correctly?
Yeah, I think so, mate. I don't, as I said, like before we started recording, I'm just constantly, now asking the so what factor of what that information means. And the reality is, like, you don't necessarily need to understand drag itself. You just need to understand how to account for it,
Right.
So it's just, I mean, it always helps to have a greater, more in-depth understanding of the elements at play, for sure. But I also understand that for some shooters, they're not really interested in that either. They just want to hit more targets. They're not really interested in the intricacies of the pitch in your asymmetric angle for that causes aerodynamic jump or something like that. They just look, Chris, just tell me what I need to do, mate. Yeah.
But I don't know, man. I see, again, mechanical engineering. I'm not the most intelligent person. Like, I really had to work hard to get my degree. I wasn't the most math savvy. I wasn't the most physics savvy. I did well in high school. But when I got to college, it was a completely different, and I had to learn myself, like what is the best way for me to learn? And if I was just writing equations down and trying to memorize them, it only got me so far, right? And then once I started going into the theory of things and just going down to the base level, equations and stuff, I'm like, oh, the theory of why this does this, right? It helped me. I'm a very visual person. Like, you can't just like tell something to me. I need to see it. Like, if you're telling me how to take something apart, I just need to see it. If I watch a video of someone take apart a washer machine, I don't have to watch it again. I have a photographic memory when it comes to taking things apart or like anything. Yeah. If I watch a video, an instructional video, I only need to watch it once. I can do it myself and never have to look at the video again, which is great. But I had to learn myself is the theory. I had to almost see why things did what they did so that I understood the equations, so that I could process the information more effectively for myself. So part of me kind of hopes that people do the research and try to learn at least aspects of theory so that they're like, oh, why does this do this? Because I'm always asking why. That's just how my brain works. As an engineer, I'll walk by, oh, was this fucking can an extrusion, or was this from a like whatever,
Yeah.
like, oh, is that handguard that I just got from Arrow? Was it an extruded handguard that they cut, or was it billet? What are they doing and how? And you can tell by looking at raws or whatever. But that's just how I operate, and I want to know why and know the theory so that I know why this or that is the better solution. And you don't need to be an engineer to like understand bullet theory, or you don't need an engineer to understand scope theory. And that's a whole nother 8-hour conversation, is scope theory, what glass to pick, what what are you trying to achieve, how hard are you trying to push your weapon system, and what capabilities are you trying to achieve with that weapon system. Man, we're talking about millions of recipes here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so
That's a deep. It's a deep dive, man. It's a deep rabbit hole that keeps you up at night, like laying there in bed thinking about it. I think at that point, your wife's like, I don't understand what's wrong with him, and really, you're just like, man, should I roll with a 1 in 7 or a 1 in 7.5 twist or something like that?
right. What's gonna stabilize this bullet at this distance? And oh man, you just said, I have a buddy who shoots. I forget what twist he's running and what caliber. But he's like 100 yard zero with his recipe and his load development. Fuck, that's a whole nother one. But his recipe, his 100 yard shots are dog shit. Like his groups are like one MOA or greater groups. But at 1,000, the bullet stabilizes so fucking well that he's shooting sub MOA at 1,000 yards. But at 100 yards, it's fucking dog shit. So there's also these weird recipes for load development that at 100 yard zero looks like trash, but because of how it all works out in the end, it performs differently at distance, where you might have like the ammo that I was talking about before out of my 18-inch gun. I was shooting same hole at 100 yards, but it was dog shit past 600, So it's like you said, it keeps you up at night, and you just fucking drown it with alcohol. Anyway,
chew on it, yeah.
I'm just kidding about the alcohol part. But all right. So in closing, because I mean we'll have to do a part 2 at some point.
Yeah,
if you're down
part
with that.
2, man, it's cool. Yeah,
we'll let this marinate for a bit. Let people just like process everything that we talked about. We can do a part 2. We can reevaluate what we talked about and start doing a little bit more minutia branches to what we talked about. Dude, it was super cool meeting you for the first time. This is rad. We'll have to get together at some point in real life.
Yeah, have a few beers or something, man, and chew on it a bit further.
Absolutely. Yeah. But again, Chris from Wolf Den, anything you want to close with?
Not really, just up and coming startups. So go ahead and follow us on social media. LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram at Wolfden USA, and just keep a tab on that. We're constantly sending out new content and getting involved with different events, and there'll be more dates for training schedule coming up in the near future, and lots of new and big things happening in the background. That's going to be really cool moving forward. So
yeah. Hell yeah. In today's current climate, though, I have one suggestion for your social media, something that'll give me an opportunity as a kickoff point to talk about. Everyone always asks, I don't have Gucci money to step into a $2,500 action, a $1,000 chassis, a $3,000 glass. How can I get started? You don't have to tell me now. I'll let you marinate.
No,
on this.
I can tell you right now. I already have the answer, mate. Yeah.
You do or you don't?
Yeah, no, I do.
You have it's like a Tikka. It's probably like a Tikka or a Bergara with okay, do it. Just fucking do it. Entry level, like under $4,000 setup that'll get you competing with big dogs if you want to try.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like that Tikka or the Bergara. You nailed it. Just make sure you've got a good twist rate for it as well. Most of them are coming in 24 or 26-inch barrels, which is going to make you competitive in the PRS the PRS realm in terms of good muzzle velocities. Just make sure that you're shooting pretty decent ammunition. I typically trend towards like Sierra or Berger bullets. For the most part, they're typically manufactured very consistently as well. There's some good Hornadies out there as well. And then I look at there's some really good glass on the market, especially that's just recently been released as well, like the Vortex Strike Eagle. That's at an incredible price point for all of the features and the capability and the functionality that scope has to offer. That would get you in the game. And so what I would suggest is get a Harris bipod as well. Use the old paracord flick out as we were discussing, and that setup would probably have you sorted out for what you reckon about $2,500 probably, something like that.
Yeah.
Then at that point, maybe get a spare magazine or two, and then practice and get to a point where that weapon system is holding you back. You're no longer competitive as competitive as you could be, because that weapon system is now limiting your ability to hit targets, and then it's time to upgrade.
Right.
By that point, you've probably already figured out exactly what equipment you're interested in and what you need, and you're ready to drop that 5 or 6K on a weapon system that's going to make you more competitive as well. And you've got the skills there. You're going to be able to bridge those gaps. You hear about shooters, going away and purchasing factory and just dropping a run-of-the-mill scope on and still performing exceptionally well in the PRS realm or other areas, because they've got those fundamentals and those skills, all of those base levels of skills that help the shooter accommodate and make up for maybe those few constraints or restrictions that the equipment is putting on his ability to hit targets. And so that's how I would get started for sure. I would do that, and I would just get going, and because the reality is, if you don't, you're like, hey, I just need to make sure I'm ready for this, and I need to, or a sniper competition as well, I need to make sure that I'm ready for this and I've got the right equipment, and I'll go when I'm ready. Well, you'll never go at that point,
Right.
Yeah.
So like a Tika T3, or I think it's a T3, you said the Strike Eagle, or, spend a little bit more money, get the Vortex Viper PST.
Yeah.
Pick a reticle that gives you data.
Yeah.
Pick a reticle that gives you
just a Christmas tree style reticle.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That gives you data. Run mills, because MOA is dead.
I can appreciate that coming from Australia and the metric system.
Yeah, I fucking hate MOA. But Pint-Size Game Changer is a great front bag. Get a little squeeze bag for proned out long gun stages. Having a cuddle bag or a pillow bag, Coltac makes the cuddle bag, that fills a lot of voids and creating extra points of contact. So a decent, one of those, probably 6.5 Creedmoor is probably a great entry level cartridge. 26-inch barrel, like you said. You could go as a kickoff point. You could probably get like an Area 419 Hellfire muzzle device. They're self-timing. You don't have to worry about anything. It's kind of gold standard for muzzle brakes. I shoot suppressed only, just because I'm a civilized person. But
Thank you. I appreciate that as well. That's gentlemanly.
And get yourself a decent set of binos. Maybe get a Manfrotto, a $300 tripod. You don't need one of these carbon fiber Gucci tripods. Get a Manfrotto tripod. You can use it to practice rear chassis support, or put your spotting glass on it, or I like binos because they're multifunctional. I think
that's pretty popular. A lot of guys using binos in the PRS realm rather than spotting scopes, which I get that too with the engagement ranges. And I also think, like you've raised a good point with the Manfrotto or similar. If you're not directly supporting the weapon system off of that, if you're only using it, say, as like a monopod, like rear support for binos support, like that'll absolutely do the job you need it to do. The only reason purchase more expensive tripods is because I need it to actually support the weapon system on
Right.
sniper comps. So,
Right.
you know, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I'm sponsored by Crux Ordnance tripods, which are super Gucci, super expensive, but you know that's the high end side. So yeah, for anyone listening, with about 3.5 grand between ammo, magazines, bags, gun, glass, bipod, sling, spotting glass, tripod, yeah, you can start building your capabilities with a very minor investment compared to other weapon systems. And if you really are good at shooting that, shoot production. Just like anything, you get to shoot a class of firearm. Production is what, under a $2,000 rifle, factory rifle, under a well, it doesn't have to be fully factory, but under a $2,000 weapon system, under a $2,000 glass, and you can shoot production. And you could be winning production in every match because no one else is shooting production. So there's always that confidence booster element there as well. One of the best shooters in the Northeast shoots a Ruger RPR in 6mm with a Krieger barrel and a Viper. I think it's like a 2.5 to 25 maybe Viper PST Vortex, and he's fucking smashing dudes with $12,000 rifle builds that shoot, you know, every weekend of the year. You know, he's just good. So
skill level at that point, yeah.
It's just skill. So anyway, that's great. Chris Wolfden, this is episode 14 of the ANR Design Unholstered podcast. I hope everyone listening enjoys this. Digest it. Take your time with it. This is a doozy, but we'll bring you back for a part 2. So
awesome. Thanks very much, Alex. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely.